Hello, my friends. Welcome to the fourth and last video in a series of videos on the latitude of planets. We're going to look at some interesting things that happen with the latitude of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and particularly very recently, within the last few years, the latitude of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn have done something very interesting. We're going to take a look at this and propose some ideas of what it might mean in terms of the astrology of interpreting it. So here's a graphic ephemeris. We've looked at this before. This is for 30 years, 1995 to 2025. And if you look at this for a while, you might notice something. First of all, Uranus and Neptune have very low inclination, especially Uranus, and they stay very close to zero. This light blue Uranus line, it might be hard to see, but if you follow my cursor, it's almost perfectly horizontal. It goes up a little bit here at the end of the graph in 2025. It's reached a high point for Uranus. Uranus, again, has very low inclination, stays close to zero. Neptune also stays close. So here's Neptune starting a little bit high, coming down about in the middle of the graph, and then coming lower. So I just wanted to point out that Uranus and Neptune are in this graph, but they remain so close to zero, you might not notice them. Pluto, which has an extremely high inclination, coming down from very high. But what I want to especially look at here is Jupiter and Saturn. Saturn is the black one. That's very low, down here at the lowest part of the Venus. When this graph starts in 1995, it's low. It starts coming up, and then it comes up to its highest point. This is around 2000. Oh no, it keeps going up, 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 until about the middle, which is somewhere around 2011 or 2012, and then it comes down. And it waves. That's does one wave each year, as Pluto also does. So here's Saturn going up and then coming down. Now, Jupiter is purple, starts fairly high, might be a little harder to see against the other planets. I removed Mercury because if Mercury was in here, you wouldn't be able to see anything, but it would cover up so much because it goes up and down so fast. But I think you can see Jupiter coming down here purple, and then going up, and then back down. And the point I want to really focus on is right over here around 2017, the Jupiter and Saturn latitudes are conjunct. The black Saturn line and the Jupiter purple line come together around 2017, and they stay together through about 2022. So there's 3, 4, 5 years. I would say roughly 2016 through 2023. That's a long time. 2016. 7, 8 years, Jupiter and Saturn happen to have very similar latitudes. And periodically, Mars will cross over those. And you'll have Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn all having the same latitude. So what I did is I did a shorter period of time, starting around 2017 to 2023, so I could see the details. Right in here. 2014 to 2024, roughly. I did a graph just for this time period to see when Jupiter and Saturn and Mars might all have the same latitude. And what I found was on February 1st, 2020, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn have the same geocentric latitude, and it's zero. How cool is that? On February 1st, 2020, the latitude of Mars is 0 north, 0, 0. And Jupiter is 0 north 02, and Saturn is 0 north 01. And we could use the time adjust. Let me see. I didn't bring up this chart ahead of time. What is this for? February 1st, 2020. Let's see. I don't think I've got it here. Do I? February 1st. Here I got March 1st, 2020. It doesn't really matter. That's fine. Let's do time adjust. I'm just pulling up a chart, and I'll go to this interactive chart adjust. Oh, it says March 1st, but this is for February 1st. This is the chart. Excuse me. I gave it a chart name of March 1st because that's where I started, but I had time adjusted it to February 1st. So on February 1st, 2020, there it is. Mars 0 north 00, Jupiter 0 north 02, Saturn 0 north 01. I can go one day earlier. And now they're all, we've got 0 north 01, 2, 1. They're all within 2 minutes. And 2 days earlier, Jupiter goes back to 0, goes up to 0 north 03. If we want to use an orb of only 2 minutes, then I'll go a day forward from January 31st to February 1st to February 2nd, still all within 2 minutes. February 3rd, still within 2 minutes. February 4th, still within 2 minutes. I've got to go up to February 5th, and Mars moves down to 0 south 03. So between January 31st and February 4th, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are all within 2 minutes of 0. So actually it's the Earth, as well. They're all at 0. Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And that's what we're seeing in this graph. Going back to this is in February 1st, 2020 is right when Mars crosses the 0 with Jupiter and Saturn. They're all exactly together, somewhere right in here. All exact, and for about 5 days, they're all at 0. This is an extraordinary event. It would happen only once, I don't know, maybe every 100 years or something. Jupiter and Saturn are only together during this 7 or 8 year time period. So somewhere else in this time period could have gotten also close. But February 1st especially, from January 31st to February 4th, all 3 of these are very much at 0. Well, what happened? What happened on February 1st? What happened is that's the approximate time that the COVID pandemic started really accelerating and spreading. So here I've got a note about it. The COVID-19 virus was detected in December, probably started around October, but the world didn't know about it until December. Concern about the pandemic started spreading, and global news started around February. It was right around February that you might say the panic started, when the realization that there's this new virus that is spreading. And the first case in the United States was on January 21st. The quarantine in China began on January 23rd. So it was late January when this feeling of urgency and concern developed. And by early February, everybody's beginning to be aware of this virus. And nobody really knows exactly how long it's going to last. Some people were saying, they think it'll be over by the summer. You might remember that, President Trump and other people were saying, it might. And, we didn't know. I'm not picking on President Trump or, former President Trump or anybody else. But I'm just saying nobody was certain what was going on. And now here we are making this video in October 2021, and we're still dealing with it. So it's been a long-lasting problem, and, you know the whole story. My point is this whole thing got fired up when Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn were all at 0 north, 0, 0, within 2 minutes of it. And that's something that happens extraordinarily rarely. So that's, maybe it's just a coincidence, but it's a very interesting coincidence that these planets came together in geocentric latitude during this event. Now, here's something else that's interesting. Here's a graph of all of the planets, except I removed Mercury, because if I leave Mercury in here, it would just cover everything and you wouldn't be able to see anything because it moves so much faster than the other planets. Of course, the moon has been removed from all of this as well for the same reason. This is for 100 years from 1926 to 2026. And there you see that rhythm of Venus that we talked about in previous videos, where it goes, up, 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 and then a big up, and so on. It's got this like periodic thing to it. And there's a very interesting Mars. We talked about it periodically. It goes all the way down to 6 South. We talked about that in the other videos. And in this 100-year view, you can clearly see the rhythm of Saturn. It's a little clearer than in the other graphs. So there you see it. It's got, it starts high, and then another 1, 2, 3 more peaks. And Jupiter, of course, is a faster planet. And you see the purple Jupiter line starting at around 0 in this particular date that I happen to start on. And then it goes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So you see the Jupiter and Saturn, and this graph really makes clear how Jupiter and Saturn came together. Look at that. If you look at the 1930s, the left side of the graph, they're out of sync. There's the 2 little Jupiter peaks, and then the next one, they come into sync. The Jupiter and Saturn graphs came almost into sync around the late 50s to 60s. Then they're out of sync. They're not together. And then they come together for a very long time, which we just talked about, right in here. What did we say that was? Like 2014 to 2024. And then they'll separate out again. And look at Pluto. It looks like a big arch over the 100 years. That's the latitude of Pluto, reaching its maximum north latitude of 17 degrees in late 1970s to early 80s. So that's quite interesting. And now here is something that astrologer Gary Caton showed me. I was having a discussion with Gary and Gemini Brett, 2 astrologers who are very knowledgeable about astronomy as well. And Gary posted on this Facebook discussion that we were having this graph. So I just want to thank Gary for it. He's the one who found this. And it's a little bit low resolution here, but you can see what's going on. It's a measure of wealth inequality. The top 1/10 of 1% is the red, and the blue, this purplish blue, I'll just call it blue, is the bottom 90%. And what this is showing, that is currently in the 2000s, they've come together, which means that the top 1/10 of 1% has as much wealth. This red, the top 1/10 of 1%, they used to have only less than 10% of the wealth of the United States. Now they've come up to over 20%, and the bottom 90% have come down to 20%. So it's showing that the rich are getting rich and the poor are getting poorer is what's happening. We all know that's been happening in the United States. But what's fascinating is that it matches the latitude of Pluto. This gray line is the same gray line that I graphed here. Here it's in a little more detail, and you see it going up and down the geocentric latitude of Pluto. The heliocentric latitude would look basically the same but smooth. So anyway, that's the latitude of Pluto, and it matches. So as Pluto's latitude increases, wealth inequality in the USA decreases. When Pluto is near zero north, no, as Pluto's latitude increases, wealth inequality decreases. So when Pluto is near zero, the wealth disparity is greatest. The top 0.1% now have as much wealth. They've gone all the way up to have the same wealth as the bottom 90%. So when Pluto is near the ecliptic plane, there's more discrepancy in wealth. That might be counterintuitive. You might think that when Pluto moves away from the ecliptic plane, it's like losing connection with reality and disparities are happening. But it's the other way around. As Pluto gets to the ecliptic plane, as it gets close to zero latitude, wealth inequality increases. This might suggest that wealth inequality may decrease in the future because Pluto's will be moving away from the ecliptic plane. Although it'll be moving south. It'll have a south latitude instead of a north latitude. So we'll have to see what that means. Anyway, it's a remarkable fit. The geocentric latitude of Pluto is matching these lines almost perfectly. Quite extraordinary. So we are done with our exploration of the latitude of the planets. What have we concluded? Number one, and I'm going to introduce some speculations on how to interpret here in the conclusions. Number one, it's interesting. Geocentric latitude is very interesting. We rarely look at it, and I hope across these 4 videos that we have learned a lot about what latitude is, how it changes, how it's affected, how it's related to the orbits of the planets. So hopefully we've learned a little bit about the orbits of the planets. We're interpreting where planets are. It's nice to know what actually goes on, what the fundamental what we call the orbital elements are, inclination and eccentricity, and we learned some interesting things about how all that works together in affecting what the geocentric latitude of Mars is in particular. So because we interpret planetary positions, it's good for us to know about how planetary positions are measured, how the positions change, even if we don't know yet how to incorporate all this into our interpretations. Now, what about the interpretation? Well, I suspect that whenever, here's my guess about it, and I've gotten some ideas from other people, but observing what's going on and looking at it in people's charts. I mentioned in one of the early videos, I have, when I was born, Mercury is at a very high latitude. So I was born with Mercury in its heliocentric orbit was 90 degrees past the north node at it's at a very high. So you can just look at different people and try to make sense of it, look at transits. Okay, so here's what I came up with. I think that whenever the geocentric or the heliocentric latitude is near zero, there is a tendency for the planet to be immersed in activities and be instinctive. So when the latitude is near zero, the person is plugged in. It's like you're plugged into the way things work. You're plugged into the ecliptic plane. You're plugged into the sun. You're plugged into how things are. You are part of life. You're in it. When a planet moves away from the ecliptic plane, and this is true, I think, both geocentric and heliocentric latitude, there's a tendency to be more distant, to see things from a different point of view, to be more of a strategist and a designer. I mean, it makes sense. It's like common sense. The planet is off the ecliptic plane. It's giving the ability to see things from different points of view. Let me say that again, because I think this is my guess right now, that when the latitude of a planet is large, it gives that planet the ability to see things from more points of view, to be like a strategist, to think, well, what about this? What about that? Let's consider the options. To be a designer. Ooh, how should we design this? How should we frame this? The person's more inclined to look at things from different points of view. The result of that can be something like a strategist or a designer. Doesn't mean that they're smarter or more objective. I don't think so. Maybe a little bit of objectivity, but it's not about objectivity directly. It's about points of view. To look at something from a different perspective. And when you do that, you think about what your options are, strategy, design. And the person also is more of a strategist and a designer than a person participating and engaged in life. So when the latitude is low, the person is engaged. They're immersed. When the latitude is high, they're more inclined to be philosophers, academics, designers, or strategists. Philosophers, academics, designers, strategists. Not necessarily academics, not necessarily philosophers. Maybe they're more like designers, strategists. In one way or another, they're looking at things from different points of view. If it's Venus, different aesthetic sensitivity. The person does not plug into one aesthetic. They entertain different aesthetics, different perspectives, different advantages and disadvantages of how things are beautiful in different ways. Low latitude, when the planet's near zero, either geocentrically or heliocentric latitude, it inclines to engagement. The person's plugged in. And from that engagement, they're more likely to have expertise. So there's a trade-off. Low latitude inclines towards expertise. Why expertise? Because the person is immersed. They're not questioning. They're not doubting. They just get in and they do it. So high latitude inclines to think tanks, academia, and power from a tightly knit outside group. Low latitude inclines to easy connectivity with a large number of people and comfort with changing trends and collective experiences. Low latitude has an advantage for popularity. It plugs in, it feels it, it enjoys what's going on. High latitude tends to be a little bit separated out and often forms a tightly knit outside groups, more like cliques or think tanks, specialized operations, high latitude, people with some other view. So that ability to plug in with low latitude helps in becoming more popular, more in tune with what's going on, to feel what the pulse of life is. Now, I think this is true for both geocentric and heliocentric latitude, and I don't know yet what the difference is. So when the heliocentric latitude is near zero, I think this happens. When the geocentric latitude is near zero, this also happens. Let's see, that was my last slide. And in regards to the wealth disparity, I think what happens is that as Pluto reaches zero, people are more plugged in. They're more instinctive. They're more engaged. And they just think, how can the wealthy are just thinking, how can I advance things? How can I make more money? How can I have greater success? And they're able to just move with what they're instinctively feeling. When the latitude gets greater, then there's more doubt, there's more questioning, there's more of a tendency to take different points of view and different options. So they're thinking more about the social context, the effects, and different things they might want to plug into instead of just being immersed in their big business enterprises and pushing them forward as fast as they can and thereby acquiring more wealth. So low latitude, it tends to more extreme effects sometimes because of the expertise, because of the greater extent that people push things. There can be a greater dedication to the pursuit, whereas when latitude is great, it's an alternative point of view. There can be dedication, but often to an alternative, not so much to what is happening now. High latitude inclines more to moderating people's passions by bringing in alternatives. There's more variety, more alternatives, and less of a singular push and forward. So things get, you might say, more complex, more diverse, and so wealth, activity gets more dispersed as Pluto moves away from zero latitude. This is an attempt to make sense of the data, both the mundane data and in individual charts. You can look at people who have a planet at a very high north or extreme south, and that's an interesting thing also that I'm not sure of. What's the difference between a planet at a high north versus high south? And it does appear that north is a little more, you might say, cerebral or logical, and south is a little more deeper, deeper sensitivity coming from underneath. But this is still a little bit speculative. We really need to follow this carefully, do maybe some extreme case sampling studies of people who have a planet with the most extreme north geocentric and most extreme north heliocentric, and same for south. I think we need some studies like that. I think we need to track things a little more carefully so that we're not so prone to selection bias and all the problems we have from just what we happen to observe. But that's where we are. In conclusion, I hope you've learned a lot about the way planets move. I have. For example, I was not aware before I made these videos that the geocentric Mars latitude goes further south, beyond 6 south, as compared to the Mars north latitude. Geocentric north latitude only goes to 4 north. That Mars dips further south, and then it goes north. I didn't know that. I didn't know it was unusual. I didn't know that Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn all came together at 0 north on around February 1st, 2020. So a lot of things, in exploring this and also just visualizing what this actually looks like and actually seeing the orbits, I hadn't really done that as clearly either. So, there's even if you kind of knew some of this or, being able to visualize, I hope that helps. I hope this also gives some first ideas on how we might also interpret these things. I do think it's meaningful, and I do think that this is a case where heliocentric could be important because it shows us the oscillation of the planet as it goes from its farthest away at aphelion up to meet the node to its highest point, reaches its lowest point. I got mixed that up. Let me say that again. There's 2 oscillations. For heliocentric, as the planet reaches its lowest point, 90 degrees before the north node, to its highest point, 90 degrees past the north node. That's one oscillation. The other oscillation is where it is in its orbit. Is it near the sun at perihelion, or is it near aphelion? There are 2 different kinds of oscillations. The oscillation based on the orbit, which is the planet near perihelion, aphelion, and there's the oscillation in terms of its inclination. Is it towards the bottom or top? Those are 2 different things. And we saw how they interact with Mars. That the perihelion point of Mars happens to be not too far, about 16 degrees away from where Mars is at its lowest point, and that results in Mars going to this extreme south geocentric latitude on rare occasion. So, interesting things we notice. So I hope this gives some appreciation and understanding of how the planets are moving and some speculation about how we might interpret them. Thank you very much, my friends. God bless. Namaste.